are back with another Ramp Careers Daily Update. I am here with Mitch and Manoj per usual, and I am Danny, and we are the three co-founders of Ramp Careers. What's going on today, guys?
Missed both of you on the weekend. We should do this every day of the week.
I need a break from you guys once in a while.
Well, lots to talk about. We'll battle back and forth over who's right on that topic. But today we want to talk about the ever important SDR to AE handoff process. But before we jump into that, we've got some cool news of the day to talk about. I saw a CNN business article that said Instacart onboarded 250,000 workers, and they're planning on onboarding around 300,000 more workers in a short time. But some of the veteran Instacart shoppers, the workers that were in place before, are now getting upset because they don't have a monopoly on all of the shopping asks that are coming through. Guys, what's your take? Isn't more jobs better for the country?
I think so, Danny. A couple of things. One is, if I were an Instacart shopper, my longer term worry would be about something else taking the job away from me completely, because a lot of fulfillment centers, especially when Amazon runs through its fulfillment operations, a bunch of it is just driven by robots. The only reason why we have all of this confusion today is because you still have conventional grocery stores that are meant to provide shoppers a in-person experience exists, and Instacart came in as a layer on top and said, hey, listen, you don't need to shop there. Somebody else will go shop there on your behalf. But in a future world where you don't really care about an in-person shopper experience, I don't even think you need to have retail type locations. I can completely see how all of this happens at warehouses. Things are not stocked for presentation purposes, but things are stocked in order to kind of expedite fulfillment. And so if I were doing this today, I'd be thinking about, well, I have a job today, but how do I think about reskilling and upskilling myself so I'm prepared for all of these inevitable changes that will come a few years down the road? But short term, I get it. I mean, I can see why you had, your little niche job, and now all of a sudden there's a bunch of other competition. Hey, such is life.
Yeah, I'm just shocked by the actual volume. 300,000 workers, that's insane. Just quick Google search, it looks like Target employs about 350 folks worldwide. So just to give you some perspective there, that's an insane volume. I've never used Instacart. Have you guys at all?
Yeah, it's great. They do a really good job, I have to admit. My middle brother actually worked there for a time and got to see some of the inner workings of how they work. They're pretty efficient, and they do a good job. It's definitely a luxury app, though.
I mean, Is it though, Danny? Because you live in a city like, we live in Brooklyn. For us to go to a grocery store, you'd have to take Uber, because we can't carry everything back. Most people here don't have a car. So, I mean, if you add things up, the cost of a two-way Uber plus the hassle of carrying stuff up and down, I mean, Instacart makes sense. The math, it's actually cheaper to just use Instacart.
For Brooklyn, I think it makes sense. We're in the suburbs, so yeah, we could just drive 5 minutes to a grocery store.
I feel like I'm doing it wrong. I need to get on this train because I don't want to walk anymore to Trader Joe's and wait in line.
Sidebar: Trader Joe's refuses to do delivery.
So they don't use it? They don't use
Instacart? There is no option, Instacart or otherwise. Trader Joe's is not with the delivery model, so you can't. It's not an option. You got to stand in line for hours, and then you can get your everything but bagel seasoning.
Great. All right. Well, let's put a pin in the Instacart discussion and jump into our main core topic, which is the SDR to AE handoff process. Mitch, I know you have a ton of thoughts on this, but let's talk through the basics first. What is the SDR to AE handoff process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I've seen this process from both sides, from being an SDR, passing leads up to AEs, and then, vice versa, receiving these leads from SDRs. So essentially, this is the point where the SDR has booked that meeting, they've qualified the lead, they're ready to hand it off to the AE, to the account executive, to run with it, hopefully close that deal out. So this transition period is pretty critical because this is where the prospect is seeing some turnover and their main point of contact. So we want to make sure it goes smoothly for the prospect. We want to make sure that the AE can pick the ball up and start running right away.
Nice. And you've seen a lot of situations where SDRs do a great job of prepping the AE and potentially some instances where SDRs do a poor job of prepping the AE. Could you talk through some of the great prep material and some of the maybe poor things to avoid in terms of prepping the AE?
So I think that it starts with setting expectations on the prospect side. When, let's say I'm an SDR for a second, I put my SDR hat on, I call it the prospect. I get them interested in taking a meeting with me. I do an initial discovery call. I figure out there's some pain here we can solve. All along the way there, I need to make it clear that I'm their initial point of contact, and further discussions are going to be held by my account executive or by my, by their eventual point person at the company. And setting those expectations is clear because then it allows you to do a couple of things as an SDR. One, you can kind of set up that wall where if they start asking you hardcore budget or discounting questions, you can pass those off to a later discussion. If they try to get technical with you on the product, you can pass those off to a later discussion. This allows you as the SDR to do your job really well, which is qualify the lead, get your questions answered, and then pass it on. So it's important to set those boundaries or set that expectation with the prospect. And then when you do qualify them and when you do set up that initial discussion with the account executive, which might be called, an in-depth discovery call or a technical overview, or maybe it's simply a demo step, depending on your product, you need to make sure the AE is prepped. So that means they know exactly who they're talking to, what's their title, who do they report up into, what are some things about them? Do they talk a lot? Are they a silent observer? Do they ask a lot of questions? As much as you can tell them about the person, as well as the pain points they're trying to solve. So do they, go through your qualification standards? Do they have budget? Are they in an authoritative position to make a decision? Do they actually have a need? What's their timelines? Make sure you got those covered. And then fill in your AE with every little bit of information you covered. And in my opinion, this works best in a nice, neat, organized document that you can share with them, set up a 15-minute prep call to go over that document, and then your AE should be ready to roll. Those are kind of the high points. Everyone's process will be a little bit different, however your company set it up. Some companies will require the SDR to actually join that first call, make that warm handoff. I've seen that work really well. Other times, if the SDR simply sends an email introduction and makes that handoff, that can work. But some sort of virtual or physical handoff is typically required there.
That makes a ton of sense. And Manoj, I know that you've managed sales processes and seen it from high level as well. What are some insights that you could pass on to junior SDRs as they try to rise through the ranks and become seasoned salespeople in terms of the SDR to AE handoff process?
Yeah, a couple of things here. The first being, on its face, it's a little bit difficult to understand why you need to take your time crafting a clear and compelling story to your AE about the prospect, about the pain points. It's easy to just pass something along with minimal information. It's a lot more work to kind of go through the process of a proper handoff. And I think that oftentimes SDRs that complain about the effort involved in this process are inevitably the ones that will also complain about it on the other end when they do become AEs and they receive half-assed information about prospect or receive, at worst, incorrect information. I've been on the receiving end where I've just received information about a prospect that's simply not true. I jump on a call, I start spewing things off, and I realize that that's not the case at all, and the prospect's pissed off, right? And so I think the challenge is understanding that one day you're going to be an AE, and one day you're going to look back and wish that you had done a better job as an SDR. So contextually, I think people need to understand that the idea behind this is to simply accelerate the sales process and simply to accelerate how quickly a deal can close. I think it makes or breaks the process because if it's not done smoothly and if there's not a seamless transition from a buyer's perspective, from a prospect's perspective, that this comes off as a non-polished experience. And if you're in a competitive environment and you're dealing as a buyer at any given point, you probably have 2 or 3 people that are trying to pitch you. And so it's not simply your product or service, it's also the experience that you've had as a prospect that plays a little bit of role into whether or not they'll use your services. And so, my only suggestion is understand that while it may not make complete sense to you today, it will if you aspire to be an AE, first off. And second off, the speed and the velocity at which a deal closes, it hinges pretty heavily on the quality of the sales experience that the prospect has. Put yourself in the prospect's shoes. They don't really know or care that you have an AE and an SDR and a solutions engineer and a senior VP of sales. Like, I could care less as a prospect. I just need to know enough about your product or service without being kind of sent around. And so those are my, the only pieces of advice that I give people. And I know that they're a little more strategic and a little less tactical. I think people understand the tactical suggestion. Most folks do. There's a lot of material out there. It's the contextual piece that I think is very hard to see as a 20, 21, 22, 23-year-old. I can understand why it's not.
The importance of delivering a solid process cannot be understated. What Manoj just mentioned, from the prospect's point of view, a well-run sales process should go unnoticed, right? They shouldn't be wondering, wow, where the heck is that SDR or AE following up with me? Think about the best type of, or think about when you walk into a fast food restaurant, you don't know how everything's getting done back there, but you know your order's coming within minutes. And the best well-run restaurants operate like that. That can be the differentiator. That can be the deciding factor between you and a competitor, in some of these deals for sure. Danny, tell me as an AE how you deal with the dreaded no-show, where the SDR books that next step for you. You're all pumped up for the best lead ever. You're going to close the deal, knock it out of the park, and they no-show. Well, how can, as an SDR, how can we help avoid that trap?
Rushing, the dreaded no-show. It takes time away from the AE's calendar, and the SDR was trying so hard to book that meeting, and it counts for their commission, so they're probably devastated as well. The first thing to know is, as an AE, you need to have you need to have empathy and you need to have sympathy, because you've been in their shoes before. You know that you've served up sales qualified leads that have no-showed. So just approach it with a bit of compassion. The next thing is, I would sit down with the SDR and work together to figure out what actually happened on the no-show. Some people just no-show simply because they forgot the meeting or ran out of time or one meeting ran over. Totally fine if it's that instance. If we look deeper into the initial call, and we could do that with call recording software, or you could do that with call notes, whatever. And it turns out that we didn't actually qualify. The SDR didn't actually qualify the lead. Then I would go point by point with the SDR to help them understand what is a qualified lead and how to ask those tactful questions to make sure that they're qualifying effectively on every call. If it's something else, they weren't really qualified in the first place, or they really just served up nothing burger, then that's a different topic of conversation. I do try to have a real conversation with the SDR still. Just, hey, what's going on here? This is obviously not qualified. It doesn't benefit either of us. But I think those are fewer and further between. I think generally speaking, when you're in a sales environment, everybody is really trying to do their best. And if I'm the AE, I try really hard to stay out of those management decisions. If the SDR really isn't pulling their weight, that's up to the manager to decide. And it will come out in the numbers over time.
Well, I have a question for both of you, since it looks like we've all been on the receiving end of no-shows. I remember, Mitch, back when we were at YAPA, I'd immediately follow up with a text message with a couple of ghost emojis to you, kind of made light of the situation and help deal with the sadness. But what do you think are the reasons, if you look back objectively on all the times that folks didn't show up on meetings and you had to kind of stack the reasons? What do you think are like the top 3 reasons?
Well, I think it's a combination, first of all. I don't know the stats off the top of my head. My gut says it's probably a third. I think there's honest mistakes. I think there's times when they might be interested, but then they see it on their calendar and they're like, not that important. And then I think there's times where the SDR is really good at just getting the meeting, and it's the prospect wants to brush them off. But to your last question there, I think one way to figure that out before wasting the AE's time and everyone else's time is by following up the day before. And especially if the prospect hasn't accepted the calendar invite, or there's multiple people on the call and a couple of people are missing from the call, following up the day before, confirming that they're ready for the meeting is an easy way to try to get them to show up, or at least find out that they had no intention of showing up. You'd rather learn that the day before than wasting everyone's time. I mean, as an AE, I can't tell you the number of times I've prepped for a meeting, spent, an hour of my time doing research, getting geared up, building a deck, and nobody shows up. And it's sad. It's heartbreaking as an AE, and it's inefficient as a sales process.
That's right. And Mitch, you covered it well. I want to get us out of here on one question, but the one thing I'll say before is and I think your ratio is right. It's probably a third, a third, a third. The one thing that I would add is there's a level of excitement that SDRs can build with a prospect. And I found that the SDRs that are great at generating excitement from the prospect about the product, about the offering, and about the benefit that the product has or the pain that the product will solve, better and more likely that prospect is to show up. Now that's super fluffy. I know there's no metrics behind that, but there is this intangible excitement that some salespeople just have, and they can just build it. And they don't have to be super enthusiastic or passionate. They can just say things with the right tone and the right emphasis to build that level of excitement. One more topic for you before we get out of here. So what are some of the best ways you've seen in your career that SDRs can learn from their account executives and pull from their account executives in order to improve this process for both sides, both the SDR and the AE, improve the handoff process?
I'll keep it simple. I think 15-minute prep call prior to the handoff and a 15-minute debrief after the call. Regardless if the SDR is on the call with the AE or not, you should always debrief as a team, talk about what went well, what could have been better. Those two things alone will help you learn how an AE is thinking about the call, preparing for the call, and then how they thought the call went. And then if you're an aspiring AE, which if you're an SDR, you probably should be if you're trying to have a long-lasting career in sales, follow the deal all the way through. If that deal is progressing to demo, to proposal, to closing stages, tag along, ask the AE if you can listen in on calls, or at least find 15 minutes, during the week to understand what the deal motion is and where it's at and how it's progressing.
Yeah, I agree. My only addition to it is I think that the debrief is probably twice as important as the prep call, because that's the only opportunity that folks can enjoy the benefit of hindsight and then retroactively say, this makes sense. This is what went well. This is what you shared about the prospect with me. This is what I learned about the prospect from the call. Here's where there's alignment. Here's where you made things up, or here's what you missed. And if you have enough reps at it, you'll inevitably become very good at it.
Those are great. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I think we nailed it on this one. So we will end it there today for Mitch, Manoj, and I. This has been another Ramped Careers Daily Update. Thanks, all. See you later.
Guys.
Bye.